obviously the business department has the business department. Welcome back to Perpetual Jank Machine, now in glorious HD, also known as using somewhat high quality audio this time. I'm John.
And I'm Miles.
So, Miles, you actually brought up a little while ago, you noticed that there was a difference in how the business part of a business and the technology part of a business conducts itself. In that the tech part of the business is usually a little bit more relaxed, and the businessy part of the business, which contains a lot of the non technical management and a lot of the people who make the business's core function work, like, for example, if we're talking about a food delivery service, that might be the people who schedule routes and plan expansions and handle businessy things, right?
Of course, serious businessy things.
Yes, for serious businessy things. So that got me thinking about a lot of the differences between tech and business and how it is really this kind of new paradigm of how people tend to conduct themselves in the workplace. Because a lot of the businesses that I'm familiar with do largely the same thing. So I think we have some commonality in our experiences here. So I was kind of curious what actually led you into coming to that conclusion. And then I guess I could share what led me to coming to that conclusion, and we might be able to tease out why exactly this is happening.
Yeah, probably the most like experience that's coming to mind is I worked at like a bank for a little bit. And like, you get there and then like some of the employees that have been there for like a long time, they're like, "Oh, hello, interns." Like, "Oh, things are really changing around here." And they're like, they're like, "Oh, it's wild. They're now letting like the tech people like wear t-shirts to work." And it's like you're just like so dumbfounded. You're like, wow, what a change. Because like from an outside perspective, you're like, this seems so stupid and frivolous. And from like the inside, they're like, this is wild, this is revolutionary. I can wear a t-shirt to work. It's just so weird.
Yeah, it's really strange because I had a similar experience in that a bunch of my previous jobs a long time ago did something very similar where the people who were conducting pretty much all of the non-technical work were expected to do office casual, and then the programmers could show up in t-shirts that they recently painted a house in, and that was fine.
It's I'm just like imagining like a really big meeting and then there's like 12 people at the meeting except for like the lead of like a tech team and he's just in like he's just in like the most casual attire while everyone else is like full suits and ties.
Yeah, the management is a little bit more, I guess, they try to dress so they're not too out of place in those kinds of situations. Like, they're usually wearing polos and stuff, at least, if they're in.
I mean, they're paid to dress nice at that point, like.
Yeah, you can think of it like that. But especially among the rank and file, I mean, it's really no holds barred with respect to that. And I think a lot of this might just kind of come down to the fact that the tech people are usually kind of sequestered to this other part of an organization. A lot of them, I mean, we talk about remote work. When they are working on site, you don't need to bring clients to see them, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a good point. Yeah.
Although that also kind of goes into uh, there are other departments that are like this, right? I don't really think that you would need to bring a client in to see your, I don't know, HR department, your internal marketing department, your recruiters, stuff like that.
Yeah, now that you mentioned that, it does seem a bit strange. I mean, like art departments have always been like known to be like, oh, like more free form, but like other than that, yeah, it's kind of weird that HR is like full dress up all the time.
There's kind of some like air of formality surrounding HR, and I am not trained at all in the ways of HR. So I might be speaking completely off base here, and there may be a valid reason that serves your job purpose if you work in HR to dress nicely. But the recruiter and the people in talent acquisitions are certainly not going to be meeting clients, and they're also certainly not going to be like discussing pay with people. So that's also kind of strange because those people, from my experience, generally are not held to that kind of a standard, especially in some of the past jobs that I've been at. I mean, the tech people were usually held to some reasonable niceness standard of thing, like you were expected to wear a polo, but everything above that was button down shirt and a tie at minimum.
I feel like the business is like I feel like they start to feel like, oh, tech people need this kind of like environment. They're like, oh, what would the tech people do if they had to dress up every day? Like I feel like they focus on like not the correct like problems with their business often. They're like, they just focus on like these weird things and they're like, well, startups like do like nobody at a startup has to like dress up and those are tech companies and we want to look like a tech company.
That much is true, but at the same time, having been in that situation where I did have to wear a button down shirt and a tie, and having been just genuinely uncomfortable on the drive home from said job every single day because said button down shirt and tie did not breathe well and were very scratchy and itchy.
Oh, you poor thing.
I know. It's just so profoundly strange that this is myopically applied to tech because don't get me wrong, I like the benefit. I don't want to have to show up to work in a suit and tie or a button down shirt or something like that. But at the same time, I feel like this should also be extended to the people who are working as, I don't know, administrative assistants or something like that, especially if there's not going to be a client on premises that day.
Yeah. It's really strange how they just yeah, like they only assume the tech people like this will only benefit our tech department. Therefore, we're only doing it to our tech department. I think it's a bit like that there's like it's tried and true and proven, like you know what I'm saying? You don't want to just try out random things in a company. If it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of philosophy. Um yeah, I think it's like a mix of all of that.
I suppose, but when you're starting up a company, there's nothing to really change about how you. Well, I mean, if you start up as a startup, right?
Wow. Profound.
Very profound. Okay, so if the beginning part of your company is this kind of fast and loose sort of startup environment, right? And
Yeah.
most companies kind of start like that.
Yeah.
So at that point, you are in a startup atmosphere. So at some point, something had to have changed, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Or you just started at the point where you decided that everybody was going to wear suits and ties or business casual or something like that. At which point there was nothing to change about it because there was nothing
I think
before
that
that.
is true because I think startups usually are the companies that have these like weird cultures, like Facebook and like Google and all that.
Even if you start up like you're a bank or something like that, right? If you start up and you say, I want everybody to dress like they work for a bank or a law firm or something like that, you are making that decision consciously at the beginning of your company.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And it is not a change. It is fundamentally not a change because this is the way that it was at the inception of the company.
Yeah. I guess the weird thing is honestly that they are changing. Because like as I said, I was at a bank. Why would they change their like tech department to be more freeform and all of that? Unless, less business culture.
It might just come down to the fact that, I mean, honestly, I would see having to dress up as a demerit against a company if I were to apply to it. Because I know that I don't enjoy doing that, and I know that I have a lot of nice looking but casual clothing that I can wear into the office that is comfortable and that fits me very well, whereas my more formal stuff is by necessity more expensive, so I obviously don't have as much choice in it, and it's frankly not as well fitted to my body because there are not as many people creating business shirts as there are t-shirts.
I think you can just go to a tailor to get that fixed. But
Yeah, but that costs money. That costs
oh, you
money.
poor thing with your good old tech job. How will you survive if you can't buy the newest remake of Final Fantasy?
Well, at that point, if I have to go to a tailor to get a suit tailored because I'm very uncomfortable due to some quirk of how my suit works in the shoulders or something like that, that's effectively a deduction from my pay because I'm required to spend that out of my pocket to do that.
I mean, yeah, but why does this only apply to tech department? Like, you feel like the business department's like, oh, I couldn't possibly imagine going to sleep without my suit and tie on. Like, what kind of people do you think they are?
Well, yeah, but that's why I'm saying I think that that's why they're changing. Obviously, the people who are client facing or meeting with other people at different businesses trying to forge some kind of, I don't know, relationship between those businesses or for
Or
marketing
just
purposes
forge.
or whatever. People who are publicly facing and not only going to be interfacing with people who are internal to the company, those people might have a reason to dress up sometimes, right?
Yeah, I guess.
And it's probably easier if you expect them to have to dress up, say, a third of the time. Then it's probably just easier to say, okay, always dress up, because that way you're never caught on a day when you thought you didn't have to dress up, but you did. So you're never going to show up to a meeting in a t shirt.
But what happened to casual Fridays?
That's another thing, is that you have casual Fridays and then you just don't schedule any super important client calls on Fridays.
I feel like it kind of like proves the whole absurdity of the situation. Like people are like, "Oh my goodness, not wearing a suit and tie to work? Like this is revolutionary." Like it really didn't matter. I feel like this proves.
Well, this just goes back to why formal wear exists in the first place. I mean, that goes back to the ages of kings and queens, and before that, dictators and war chiefs and whatever.
True, 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 true.
I mean, it serves a purpose. I mean, that's why we invented it as a
Yeah.
society, and that's why we all abide by it. But I'm hoping that our society has moved on and progressed past those days of war chiefs and kings. We might be able to realize that it does not matter at all the piece of cloth that you have draped over your body for that day.
Hey, CEOs are war chiefs and kings.
The purpose of formal wear is still existent, and I think the regularity of scheduling is kind of important. And it's obviously ridiculous to say, okay, we're only going to visit clients on Tuesdays. There's going to be another company out there, if everybody did this, that only accepted client or only accepted vendor visits on Wednesdays, right?
Yeah.
So, other than, I guess, the continuous march of progress for society, I'm wondering why this is kind of happening now in terms of the casualization of things. I mean, obviously, back in the day, pretty much everybody wore formal wear when they were doing business that was significantly more formal than what we're wearing nowadays. And I'm curious where this will go in the future as well, just because, it seems like we're starting to get to the point where you can't go much further. I mean, a t-shirt and jeans is pretty, that's kind of like the lowest rung until you start getting into clothing that is obscene for some reason or another, right?
I just think you're not being progressive enough.
And there are some workplaces that will let you wear your death metal t-shirt without any problem whatsoever. So, where do we even go from there, right?
Yeah, I think obviously, it usually started by startups, you know what I'm saying? Like a startup starts, they have no idea what they're doing, so they don't know to like dress up to meetings and stuff like that, you know what I'm saying? It's three dudes in like their basement, stuff like that. The company
Mm-hmm.
grows and they just keep whatever, works for them, so they don't dress up, so no one else has to dress up. Like, like Facebook or like Google or something like that. And then by the time they're a proper sized company, all the other companies look around. They're like, oh, look what that tech company's doing. And everybody wants to be like a tech company nowadays, because that's, it,
Mm-hmm.
it looks good. It's just like a random buzzword. Like at the bank, they're like, we're not a bank anymore. We're a bank and a tech company. It's like, what are you producing that's technology other than like just mobile banking? Like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, it was
Mm-hmm.
so absurd. But anyway, I digress. I think yeah. So it starts out like that, and then like it it kind of pokes like the absurdity into the situation. Not everybody has to dress up. You don't have to do all these rigorous things, like all these meeting. Like you know what I'm saying? It pokes fun at the formality, but I feel like the companies don't actually like realize that, and then they're just like, oh, we've got to copy this because this works, so this will make us better if we copy that. Like. And I think what's sad about it is they sometimes throw out things that work well, for like no good reason. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Like, what do you mean? Do you have an example?
Yeah. So, I think a prime example would be like they were at the bank, they were trying to convert a lot of their office space to open office spaces. Like, big
Mm-hmm.
like seating, like, a bunch of random couches, desks that were all at one big open table and stuff like that. And yeah, there are
Mm-hmm.
advantages to that, but you're like there's one blaringly obvious disadvantage without being it's very distracting. Like I have ADHD. I would rather work in a cubicle environment. Like I mean, obviously it's less fun, but like I know my limits. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like that it's not very friendly to like certain people with like, disabilities like ADHD and stuff like that. Like in like companies, I don't feel like they realize that. Like, you know what I'm saying? They're just like, oh, this is the hot new thing. We've got to do it.
Yeah, and that's especially not awesome because allowing people to wear a t-shirt into work is not only somewhat increasing your employees' compensation at literally no cost to you and also their workplace well-being at no cost to you, but rearranging the office costs them a lot of money, and it also has a negligible improvement or change or on how people actually go about their work day to day.
Yeah, I feel like they don't really look at like the actual problems and like solutions. They just kind of use like real vague blanket statements. Like, they just go with whatever buzzword sounds cool. Which like obviously a more lax dress code is almost certainly a good thing. Whereas open office space, as you said, costs a lot of money. And like it might not be a good thing in a lot of scenarios. Like it might be helpful in other scenarios, but like I feel like they don't actually think over these things. Like, replacing everyone's chairs with beanbag. Not that that's like, something that happens.
Very glad that I've never worked at a place that does that.
But like, like you hear about these like weird examples of companies doing like these odd things and it's like, why? Why?
I mean, there is something to be said about gray cubicle farms. They are depressing.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I can tell you that from experience. Gray cubicle farms are not the place that I would want to work, and that would actually be another thing that I would consider when I was looking for someplace.
Yeah, there can be a medium ground. I'm just saying, like a giant table with a whole bunch of computers at it is not the most conducive environment for getting work done.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that people like to work. And I think, again, with the whole move to like the office optional paradigm of how we are working, where remote work is something that people are encouraging now, it's quite possible that we may see these kinds of offices that are best tailored to certain people. Like instead of having one big sprawling office with one layout, like there might have been previously, you might have like an office floor for maybe 3 floors worth of people with some cubicles, some open office space, some conference rooms. Why not mix and match a little bit, right?
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'm not opposed to that.
And then your employees can use that as a resource to get their work done more efficiently if they so choose. Or if they have an environment that they really like at home with a nice space heater and a nice warm heated blanket and no air conditioning in sight, they can go do that.
Yeah. No, I feel you. I feel you. Yeah.
Or maybe an air conditioner and a fan. I don't know. Maybe you're hot.
Yeah. You're hot, then you're cold. You guess, then you know.
Like your favorite can of peanuts, or you can eat tuna for lunch every single day without anybody complaining,
No, maybe you have roommates.
with significantly fewer people complaining.
Hell yeah. Yeah, no, I feel you. And hey, you can even save money on office space if some of your people are permanently remote,
Dark secret here, you can also pay them less because they don't need to drive their car nearly as much.
That's true. Yeah. And I mean, they can get more sleep. So they can actually be better performing on their actual work because they don't have to commute for 2 hours every day and get up at like 5 a.m.
Yeah, imagine the savings on coffee just alone. I mean, firstly, because they're not going to be in the office to use your coffee machine, so
You
that's like an
gotta pay for
immediate
your own
plus.
coffee.
But they also don't need the coffee anyway because they're actually getting a reasonable amount of sleep because they don't have to wake up at 6 a.m. to commute. Anyway, I digress.
Dude, I was like, when the pandemic hits, all the businesses are gonna be like, dude, we're saving so much money on office space. This is crazy. Why did we have an office in the middle of downtown LA? Like, why did we do this? We could have just literally bought like a shed in like Montana and had everyone work remotely.
It's what is it? Distressed commercial real estate.
We should shut up. We're gonna tank the LA real estate prices.
Yeah, that would be a crying shame. I would be deeply regretful if I were to cause that. Scala 3's out. It's been a long time. A lot of
Oh,
people argued about it.
ooh wee.
It's happening.
So this is gonna be the new Python 3 versus Python 2.7.
Obviously, Scala 3 is the future of the language, in the same way the Python 3 is the future of Python, right?
Wouldn't it be funny if everyone just decided that Python 2.7, they're just going to stick with it? Like literally no one switched.
Somebody tried to make a Python 2.8, which had a lot of backports from Python 3, and I would never use that in production, but you do you.
What's even the point of that? Anyway, sorry.
If you hate Unicode for some reason, if you like old URL APIs, I have no clue, honestly.
Who doesn't? Who doesn't like ASCII?
I mean, the whole reason to stay on Python 2.7 is because your current app is running on Python 2.7 and you don't want to move it to Python 3, right? Because it's not that hard of a migration.
No, you just need to change a couple of things, but still.
If you're going to use Python 2.8, that implies that you actually took the time to take your Python 2.7 app onto 2.8, right? When you could have just been taking it onto 3.0.
Yeah, it's really sus. Like if something's that important in production that it's so critical that you couldn't even like update it with like, the minor differences between 2.7 and 3. What are you building that's so critical in Python in general? Like what are you doing with your project?
Yeah, and like Python 2 is a little bit more performant than like earlier versions of Python 3. I don't know if they changed it, but as of like Python 3.43 was like 2 times slower.
Unless it's compiled Python. I'm sure that exists. I don't actually know.
There is a Python compiler, and it actually does a pretty good job for not really having that much to work with.
Yeah, it seems very awkward because nothing's strictly typecast, so you'd probably have to sort through a whole bunch of that.
So the Scala 3 new features include a significant reduction of braces. You can actually go fully significant whitespace now, just like Python. Last I remember, this was the topic of hot debate and bike shedding to God knows where in the Scala community. So I'm sure that the online communities are just exploding right now, but I think that that's pretty cool, actually. There's also just a whole bunch of, nice to have things, fixing up a ton of problems that made the language kind of a pain in the butt to use. They have, I actually noticed this, they actually have type lambdas now, which means that you can anonymously define partial generic types. It has proper union and intersect, which is, Scala has it, TypeScript has it, Clojure has it, but it's not a real compiled type system. Is that it? Is that it?
What do you mean is that?
I mean, like, the theorem provers have that.
It's only kind of useful with sets, and not too many languages that aren't really high level have sets.
I mean, I guess well, no, it's useful for, like, optionality, too. I mean, X or null is how you would define an option. So you don't have to do, like, this crazy, like, option generic T thing that you would use in other languages, or maybe monads or stuff like that. I mean, I guess, like, C# and Kotlin kind of have it with nullable types, but this is much better. And they also have intersection types like in TypeScript. So this is big. And Scala always stuck out to me as one of the languages that has a somewhat human usable type system. Like it's not hampered in the same way that Java and C# and Rust, C++ all are. It actually appreciates the underlying math of it, which makes expressing things so much easier. And Scala always seemed like more of a kitchen sink language to me. That's my other takeaway from this. It's not C++, but it's like C++-like in the sense that it has pretty much everything you could ever possibly need in a programming language,
I
and
mean,
then some.
they seem like they're trying to make it more user friendly than C++. So yeah, it inherently can't be as kitchen sink as C++. If
Oh
you
yeah,
lose,
I don't want to conflate the two languages. C++ is a garbage fire in terms of learnability, maintainability, everything.
it's so feature bloated, it's absurd.
So yeah, I think it kind of depends on what you want out of a language. So I was thinking, why would I use Scala? Because Scala 3 is something that is very technically impressive, and I think it does iron out a lot of those, okay, yes, this is cool buts that Scala 2 had, in the sense that it had just a lot of things that made it kind of annoying to write. This is very different. It is a very slick, very modern language. And I'm just trying to think of why I would use it, because I think the main reservation that I currently have with Scala 3 is that it runs on the JVM, and Clojure is still light years ahead of pretty much everything else in terms of how to structure and think about programs. Whereas Scala is very good, but it still kind of has a little bit of that old way of thinking about it. And it doesn't have a lot of support for these extremely fringe new means of going about. It's like the logic programming support. It could call into Clojure libraries, but I'm sure that would not be a fun time.
Yeah, at the point where your language that you're competing with, it's just calling the other language doesn't look very good for your language.
Yeah, and like Java has SAT solvers, but again, you're calling into a Java library, and the whole point of writing something in a Lisp is to avoid having to use this weird like class-based DSL to solve a SAT problem effectively. or to solve a logic programming problem. So there's also that. But yeah, it also has macros, so who knows?
Wait, it also has macros? What's the point of that for a non-compiled language? I don't really get it. I mean, obviously it works differently. It works a bit differently, but I don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, macros are useful in a couple of ways. Like, firstly, if you're writing a really slow language like Python, it lets you get some degree of like const expressions and inlining. Not that Python has them, but if it did, you could use that as a tool to speed it up a little bit.
Finally.
And that's actually what Python compilers do, is they just try and inline things as aggressively as possible and compute things in a constant way as much as possible. So that's one way that macros can.
I mean, I think you can add your own C files to the Python interpreter and stuff like that.
Yeah, but then you're not writing Python.
I mean, yeah, but if you are mainly running something in Python, but you have a few specialty cases that you need a lot, like most of the projects in Python, but you.
Yeah, but I'm talking like speed something up by 20% without complicating your build system effectively.
Yeah.
And then it can also be used to define DSLs, which is used everywhere in Lisp world. I mean, Clojure is a dynamically typed language that runs on the JVM, but it also has macros, and those macros let you effectively define any other language inside of Clojure that you want.
But that's getting at the same problem with using C files in Python.
Well, yeah, but it's more well integrated.
Yes,
Like,
yes, of
you
course.
can
Of
define
course.
like query syntax that is compiled into something, or a logic programming language that is compiled into something like Clojure and could feasibly be Clojure if it were not for some small limitation with how functions are called and stuff like that.
This is sounding like a nightmare to write a hypothetical project like this. Uh,
Well, it's useful in a lot of cases, like the if statement in Clojure is a macro.
yeah, but if you like just only know Clojure and you don't know other languages, and then someone's just like inlines a whole bunch of stuff from another language, and you're just like, what the hell is going on in this project? Especially if you're inlining something that's a very niche feature of another language. Like, you know what I'm saying? So it's not even like a surface level knowledge of another language will help you in that scenario.
Well, okay, but then let's say that you're using a SAT solver, right? And you want to implement it in Java. How on earth are you going to define that problem in Java to be solved, right? Do you want to say new SAT solver variable, quote, A, quote, or do you want to just type A? That's where the macro comes in.
I mean,
You don't have to abide by this weird linguistic construct that you need to create this new class that the SAT solver will understand. You just type A in the macro. That's it.
true, true, true. Oh man, I'm imagining a big project written like that, and that's gonna get real confusing real fast.
Well, it's standardized, right? You would
Yeah, no.
use this in specific places.
I'm just imagining a whole bunch of like interns at a company. They're like, "What the hell is going on? I know Clojure, and this is not Clojure."
Well, yeah, you need to learn every library that you use. If you were an intern that saw Java SQL query builders, then yeah, you're not going to know what's going on either because you don't know SQL, right?
Okay, yeah, you're bringing up good points. Okay, yeah, no, I just thought I like my brain immediately jumps to these weird scenarios.
So anyway, Scala, cool, yeah. I think I would probably use, if I wanted to write a program that has to go fast but also has to be like big and well integrated with things, I think, maybe, or that I don't want to write in Rust.
So every program ever. Okay, good.
Well, like, there's programs that I don't need to be fast. Like, I wrote that my default language is Clojure, right? And if I want other people to work on it, then I write it in Python because
Yeah, everyone knows
it's not as
Python.
nice as Clojure, but everyone knows Python.
Everyone knows Python.
And if I want it to go fast, I write it in Rust. Or if I want it to go really, really, really fast, I write it in C or assembly.
C. Or some. I do like assembly.
So, like, Scala would have to fit in between, I guess, Rust and Clojure in that stack because it's this, like, spectrum of how fast do I want it to go versus how friendly do I want it to be to me and to other people.
I mean, yeah, yes, but like why wouldn't you just write it in like I don't know Java at that point?
Well, there's a million
I
reasons.
mean, other than the obvious problems with Java.
Well, what do you mean by that? I mean,
Well, it's just a little annoying. I don't know. People just don't like Java. But do people really like Scala? Like, is Scala that popular that people are like, yeah, Scala?
I think most people who are programming enthusiasts will agree that Scala is leaps and bounds better than Java, but it has these specific problems, like the build system is slow, and there are specific things in the syntax that make it annoying to write or like visually unpleasant or something like that. Scala 3 fixes a lot of that, right? So this kind of brings it up to that this optimized like curve where you're sitting, right? Of speed versus usability. The usability got improved. Presumably the speed is just as good as it was previously. I mean, Scala is a ripping fast language. It's as fast as Java. So
Wait, I don't understand. Didn't you say it was written in on the JVM?
yeah, it's a strongly typed JVM language, so it's going to perform like every other strongly typed JVM languages, plus or minus whatever optimizations the language writers can think about.
Oh, okay. Just because, yeah, it's more okay, constrained in some sense.
Like Clojure's JVM, but it's slower because you're doing hash lookups everywhere. Java and Scala and Kotlin and presumably Groovy, I think,
Yeah,
all use the standard struct and offset based means of programming, so it's going to be just as fast as those because it's using the same primitives.
I surprisingly no Groovy.
Oh, fancy.
I had to use it for one of my internships. Although it was a particular flavor, it was like a company specific flavor of Groovy.
Mm.
I mean, it was just Java kind of. Not really, but like,
Yeah, there's just a lot of stuff that Java has done recently that it has not caught up to Scala yet, but it is definitely starting to nip at the heels of those languages like Groovy that haven't really been updated all that much. And it's also kind of gotten to the point where like some of the languages that I write are starting to, I don't know, Rust has just felt very slow in its progress somewhat recently, and RFCs aren't getting implemented at the rate that they once were, and it's like I'm starting to think that Rust might not be the best language long term for building a stack upon unless it starts to get some of these features that are very important for building large programs. Like I don't even think it has specialization yet, which was promised like God, how many years ago to make things like able to specialize certain traits. Whereas Scala, it has pretty much everything under the sun that you could possibly want in terms of a type system and in terms of the language now. The only problem is just it's a beast to learn and it's garbage collected, so you can't use it for systems programming. And it's not checked for certain types of safety that Rust is, but you have a garbage collector, so that offsets a good chunk of it. I don't know. I'm going to have to evaluate whether I want to continue using Rust or whether I should see if I can properly supplant this with Scala.
garbage collection takes up a lot of resources, though, just in general.
Well, the JVM is a world-class garbage collector. That thing can GC things a lot better than you can memory manage it half the time. Unless you are the type of person to set 8 GB stack at the start of your program and just go nuts.
I mean, there's no denying garbage collection takes up a lot of resources. Like it can't not take up a lot of resources.
Well, GC is a disqualifier in a lot of cases.
Unless you're like predefining, like unless you're like defining like what needs to be garbage collected and what doesn't, and at that point you're just doing memory management. Like like if something's got to keep track of the whole state, like it's inherently gonna take.
It's obviously a hard disqualifier for a lot of things like no real time, no systems programming, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But it's definitely fast. I don't feel like when I'm writing a strongly typed JVM language or a strongly typed CLR language or
Nowadays, it really doesn't matter because most computers are fast enough that garbage collection you don't care about, unless you're doing something like game dev, I guess. Like you know what I'm saying? Like everything's just web apps nowadays. It really doesn't
well, how
matter.
many games are written in Unity with Unity's antiquated, like, what is it, mono runtime garbage collector from 2008? Like, that's not a world class garbage collector.
I mean, yeah, I didn't know Unity was garbage collected.
Oh, yeah, use a C sharp.
Really? I mean, I knew it used C sharp. I assumed it was. Why do you like? You could just like games. I don't know. I don't know. I'm at a loss for words after realizing that. I get what you're saying though. It fits in this weird space, and I guess the only advantage right now is that it's really well supported and managed, as opposed to many of the older languages that kind of just got complacent, I guess, a little bit.
I know that Dottie's been in the works. Scala 3.0 has been in the works forever, right? Like, this is a long time coming.
Yeah.
But at the same time, const generics and specialization and stabilization of all sorts of stuff that would just make that language better. Like, is a higher kind of type RFC like even remotely close to being implemented? I honestly don't think so. And Scala has that today, and it's within 5% of Rust. So in terms of speed. So if I want something that is faster than Clojure, but less onerous to write than C in assembly, then why would I not use it over Rust, right?
Yeah, I guess the problem is how many projects are written in Rust and how many people know about Scala that would be willing to write a like entirely new project in Scala.
Yeah, and there's also like the concern of, I guess, interfacing with Linux desktop libraries, and those all have C bindings, and Rust is pretty much the only game in town if you don't want to do C or C++ for that.
Yeah, I mean, you can write C files for the JVM, and then use that in Scala, I guess.
But yeah, you're more likely to come across a Rust wrapper for like, I don't know, the Linux.
Yeah, you'd have to be doing a lot of the writing on your own.
You can just pull down like a Pulse Audio library and a Bluetooth library and a sensors library from crates.io.
Yeah, all of it.
Yeah. I don't know what that's like with Scala. Might be a niche for Rust if I'm, I might need to write, like desktop utilities, Rust, yeah, sure. Might need to still do that. But I think that Scala, I'll have to take a serious and hard look at in terms of languages that are fast but usable.
Yeah, I guess who currently uses Scala? Like, is there like a group of people that it mainly like attracts? I don't know too much about it.
I think it's still big in big data, but it's a small community, but I'm used to that. I mean, I use Clojure, so nobody uses Clojure except for startups, so.
Yeah, guess so.
And that's the show. Thanks to Meydän, that's Meyda with an umlaut N, for their track The Beauty of Maths, licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 license, which serves as our intro, outro, and interlude music. You can find more in the description of this episode. Please remember that the opinions expressed in this production may not reflect those of other participants on the show, or those of any participants' past, current, or future employers. They're also probably exaggerated a bit for comedy's sake. Anyway, thanks for tuning in.